can't use perfection as a standard and hold everyone to that for every possible procedure that they do every single time. Some of that's a function of the the judges and all that in the legal system. And I think the second thing is that doctors, if they and they should have the ability to understand the patients that they're working on are predisposed to causing these kind of problems, then they should have the right, and they should exercise that right, to reject those patients on the grounds that they're the legal equivalent of an ambulance chaser. And then the last thing, which I think would be fairly controversial, but I think if I was a medical doctor, I think I would refuse to service any lawyer. Anywhere,
Okay.
at
What?
any time for any reason. And
Well,
if every single doctor did that, I think that might go a long way towards tort reform myself, because that's actually taking an action and making these people bear the consequences for their behaviors in a way that it'll hit home fairly close.
Well, I guess, I mean, now I don't really understand why you'd zero in that much on the lawyers per se, because I mean the lawyers are being hired by a person who wants to sue. So if anything, they're a tool, per se, or I mean, for lack of a better term, it seems like the root cause is actually not the lawyer itself; it's the person who's hiring the attorney to sue for some frivolous reason.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I said I think the first one would be the patient themselves, because I suspect, and I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect if you looked at a lot of these cases, there's been probably a history of these individuals over time either trying to or threatening to do some type of a. I mean, there are clearly legitimate ones, but I think that they're grossly overestimated the ones that are frivolous. So.
Well, how would you? Well, then how would you handle? How would you, when you say tort reform? I mean, would you push for like caps on settlements, or how would you, like, for instance, let's say that you have one case where somebody is essentially a serial suer, looking to always try to sue a doctor in a malpractice format and trying to actively set up something that that is not based in any type of reality or really any type of malpractice by the doctor, and then compare that to somebody who goes into the hospital, with one leg that needs to be removed and wakes up and the other one's gone. So, like, how would you protect the person in the second case, but shield or try to shun the person in the first case?
Well, well, first of all, in the second case, when doctors make mistakes, like you've mentioned, cutting off the wrong arm or whatever, clearly that's gross negligence, and that is the reason that all the legal people and all those procedures are in place. So I'm not advocating eliminating those. It's more the first one that you said, and I think that if there's some due diligence that's done on these patients as a routine check. Look, if I want to get a layaway at Best Buy, okay, for a $500 surround sound system, they do 15 background checks on me to make sure I can pay my credit card bill and this and that and the other thing, right? And yet if you go sign up for a doctor, they don't do any background checks. So I think that those type of functions, and I think if the person came up, with dirty hands, they should reject them.
Okay.
As a patient. And the same thing if the lawyers, the same thing is true for the lawyers. I think that there are clearly there are good lawyers, and clearly there are, like we talked about, negligent cases, and they're prosecuted hopefully to the full extent and properly, et cetera, et cetera. But there's the ambulance chaser. I mean, that's where the term came from, right? Group, and those are the ones that if by the same reason and for the same ability, they should be checking their backgrounds, and they shouldn't service them. You shouldn't service your enemy. You wouldn't go in a war and find one of the other soldiers laying on the ground bleeding to death and then repair him so that he can get up and blow your head off. I mean, that's basically what you're doing. So, again, in a proper society, the doctors would have every right and every reason to do background checks on these types of people and reject doing business with them, because it would not be in their interest. And I suspect that after a fairly short period of time of doing that type of due diligence and rejecting them, they'd either have to move to Canada where they could get their health care for free or whatever.
Well,
But
free in
I think,
quotes. You got to use free
yeah,
in quotes.
yeah, thank you. Good point. But the point I'm trying to make is, outside of that, I think those would be two huge steps towards it. And after that, I think you'd have to probably argue more on the legal side of it, and which we can do, but probably we should do a separate legal show. I think I don't want to do too much.
Yeah,
on
no
that.
problem. We can go specifically into tort reform, on another show, like to talk about what exactly define what the reform really is, because that's a very vague term, and even then, I mean, it hardly even got talked about now. So we can definitely zero in on exactly how we would actually
well, I think
objective review to that.
Okay, I think in that particular case, what we do is just do the whole show on objective law, of which tort would just be one of the subsets. But let's leave that one for now. Are we okay?
Oh yeah, no, I mean we can definitely go on. I mean we definitely need to. I think we need to focus on that more. But we've got a bunch of other things to talk about. So we can move on to the next point.
So I think one of the key things here is that any type of regulated industry, you stifle innovation because it's so hard to get in. There's so much red tape. That's why you see less and less, although there have been clearly huge gains in medicine. I don't mean to imply there's not, but there would be literally another order of magnitude gain if the market were left free. And the best example you can use from that is if you look at the software business, which has very low barrier to entry and very, very little regulation, the amount of innovation it cycles in literally in quarters,
right.
2, 3, 4 times a year, huge discoveries, huge improvements. You lose that, unfortunately, in the medical field because of what it takes to play in that field and what it takes to get anyone to move. And they're all paranoid because everything's so controlled. And they're not incented to do it either. So I think innovation is another area that you lose. And then finally, the whole overarching part of the healthcare is basically upside down or inverted. And that is because today everything is based on cost control. Where in a rational society, everything would be based on outcome. So I use the example, you go to a doctor, he does a great job, you come out, if your knee feels good or your headache goes away or whatever the particular is, pay your bill in full. The better he is, the more patients he's going to get, the more he's going to be able to charge, just like a good restaurant, right? The more profit he's going to make, good for him. He's delivering value to his patients until such point that he charges so much that nobody can go there anymore, and then he'll adjust accordingly, presuming he has to.
Right, or some competitor will make him adjust.
Or some competitor, exactly. Now, how does that compare to what we do today? Today, everything is based on cost. It's how do you manage the cost. It has nothing to do with the outcome. It has nothing to do with the patient's welfare. It has nothing to do with innovation, or it has nothing to do with anything except managing the costs. And so the two extreme examples to make my point, you've got a guy who doesn't feel well, starts reaching for his chest, realizes he's having a heart attack, picks up the phone, dials 911. They come and pick him up. They drive him to the hospital, comes into the front door, hands the girl his insurance card. Just as she hits the last couple of keystrokes into the computer, everything's registered, the guy dies. That hospital just maximized their profitability because they got the procedure for fixing a heart attack, servicing a heart attack, and they got the full amount of money, and they didn't have to do anything because the guy died. Now contrast that to same scenario, guy comes in, gets registered, goes through the procedures, has multiple doctors look at him, multiple tests, multiple days turn into multiple weeks, and the guy comes out of the hospital 3.5 weeks later with a $250,000 bill. Well, let's just say that procedure was worth, from the bureaucrat's perspective, 10 grand. So the hospital's out the difference because they're going to get paid the same amount of money for the guy that died in the lobby as the guy that stayed there for 3.5 weeks.
Right. So you're talking about, like, say, Medicare's list of, this is what we pay for these procedures, right?
That's exactly right. And who's setting those standards is some completely incapable bureaucrat sitting in some building performing a job that the marketplace would never even pay for,